for that to get started. Hope we had a very great weekend, and hope we have been doing a lot of practicing, right? I hope everyone is currently familiar with GitHub, and we have all been battling with it back and forth, right, throughout the weekend. So let's know how your weekend was like, and then for the tailwind, how is it going also? Have you all built your portfolio? Yeah, so that's basically all for now. So let's just hear from one or two people, and then we are going to kickstart the class. Yeah, so let me hear from you guys. Okay, so it seems can you guys hear me? Okay, yeah, Jethro, let's hear from you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good morning, sir. Personally, I had a very good weekend. I rested a lot and then I practiced. Then some of the assignments which we were given, we attempted to the best of our ability and are hoping to do better stuffs as time goes on. And that's a little I would say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's hear from one more person, and then we go.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, good morning, good morning.
Okay. My weekend went well. It was good. And then I was able to continue my learning, Tailwind, Git, and GitHub, yeah. And then using Git Bash is a bit difficult, but I'm still trying to find my way to. I've always used my terminal in VS Code to do most of my stuff, so still learning how to use my Git Bash. So that's it from my end.
All right, awesome. So I know there certainly has to be back and forth, right? While you guys are working currently. That's what make you guys developers. So it's good to hear from everyone and to know that we are all doing great and to have us all back on the call. So today we are going to be introducing a new concept, a new way to write Java CSS. Yeah. So this time around we're going to be introducing SCSS. So it's simple and then also sweet to use. It's normally regarded as CSS with superpowers. And then it doesn't obstruct you from writing your Tailwind CSS and writing your vanilla CSS, right? So you can have a project that has SCSS, has Tailwind CSS, has vanilla CSS in it. So depending on the concept that you deem much more approachable to you, or the concept that you like using, that's going to be what you'll be using for your projects. But you are free to use like the combination of all. So that's why we're introducing all these different concepts. And then today we're going to be introducing SCSS, which is another cool way of writing CSS. And then this time around, it allows us write CSS by injecting components. And then so one of the sweet thing about SCSS is that it gives us a feel of what programming looks like, right? So it comes with programming syntax together with CSS to inject CSS styles, right? That's what SCSS does. So it's essential for us now, so that from the concept of learning SCSS, maybe when we start writing JavaScript, we have already understood some bits of fundamentals that go with some programming fundamentals, right? So I think the next course is JavaScript. So I think it's a good turn to start SCSS now. So who is excited? Let's get started. Nice. So Tailwind is very sweet, I guess. Okay. Someone. Okay. Nice. Cool. Everybody's pumped. So first off, let me just share my screen and then head over to the SCSS documentation. Okay, this is the syntax, and then this is the documentation. So is there any way I can turn dark mode here? I think there's none. All right. So the sub mentors can send this link for you in the chat, and then we understand what SCSS is. So in the official documentation, Sass or SACS, Sass is a style sheets language that's compiled to CSS. It allows you to use variables, nested rules, mixins, functions, and more, all with a fully CSS compatible syntax. Sass helps keep large style sheets well organized and makes it easy to share design within and across projects. So like I rightly explained, I told you it makes use of a bit of programming concepts, right? So while learning programming, you learn of stuff like variables, functions. So I don't think, nested rules, which are more of like if statements and mixins. But I don't think this is a programming concept. But these three, you are going to learn them fully in programming. So if you are looking for an introductory Sass, you can check out the tutorial. Yeah. So this is it, and then we are good to go. So let me check this out. Okay, so now what are variables? Let's know what variables are. So Sass variables are simple. You assign a variable to a name that begins with $, the $sign, and then you can refer to that name instead of the value itself. But despite, so this is the whole exact concept of variables, even in programming. So a variable is can be declared by you maybe assigning a particular data type to that variable. That's in like the whole programming concept, right? But in SCSS or in Sass, they are telling you that you can store a value, maybe a color, or let's say a height, to a particular variable, and then you can be able to reuse it within the project. So take, for example, like instead of you declaring, maybe you have the primary colors you are using in your application is maybe you are using blue color, and then it's a particular shade of blue. And then you are going to keep reusing this blue color in like different places, right? It's not only the background that you use the blue, you might use the blue in some text, you might use the same blue color in a button. So you don't always want to copy and paste that same blue color, right? Which might make your code messy when you want to refactor. That is probably you might want to change the color someday. So the best thing that you do in this approach is that you assign that CSS color, maybe blue, to a particular variable, and then anywhere within the app or anywhere within your styles, you keep using that particular variable. And then anytime you want to change the value of the variable, you just have to change the color. So take, for example, I want to change, my company is doing a rebrand, and then we want to change the primary color. Maybe our brand designer thinks blue doesn't make sense any longer, and he wants us to make use of green. Yeah, so what will happen is once it gives us green color, instead of we going to like all the different places that we inserted the green color within our code to paste the new colors, or yeah, to paste the new color, which is green, and replace it with blue, all we just have to do is go to the variable that we created initially. Maybe let's say background color. So we're going to change the variable now from blue to green. And then everywhere within the app is going to take effect and then going to append that colors to all the locations. So that's basically a short explanation of what variables does. We are going to see deep through what it looks like. So a variable declaration looks alike like a property declaration. It is written, you put the variable and then you put the expression. So that's how you declare the variable. So unlike a property, which can only be declared in a style, rule, or at rule, variables can be declared anywhere you want. To use a variable, just include it in a value. All right, so you can declare variables anywhere at all within your CSS file, not like properties that are declared like inside of maybe where you want to insert the colors, or I said colors, where you want to insert the styles. So this is a typical explanation. And then this is it. So this is a variable called base color. And then base color is being assigned this particular color code, which is an hexadecimal. So let me just zoom in so you see my screen. Yeah, so this is it. And then this is another color, border dark. This is another, what's it called? Variable that stores this RGBA property, which is referencing base color here. It's using base color, and the RGBA takes in a color, right? So this is a color, and then this is an opacity for that particular color. So maybe you want to make the border, you want to make the background or the border darker. You just insert the color and then an opacity for it. So this is we referencing base color. So this is the same thing as what? As this same color. So anywhere we use this, Sass is going to take it as this color within our code. So, and then finally, we can also use it here. You see, we can be able to alert. So this is an alert class that we are trying to style. And then we are adding a border to it, which is 1px solid. And then you know what we put here after, right? This is the color. So we are putting border dark. So we are saying it's referencing this particular color now. And then this particular variable, which is border dark, which reference this color. And then this color still reference this base color to have like the real color that we want, and then give it a particular opacity, and then we are good to go. So that's just a clear declaration of what a variable look like. So CSS has variables of its own, which are totally different than Sass variables. Yeah, so know the differences. So CSS has variables, Sass has variables, right? How many of us are aware? Because I know we might have come across like the CSS variables. Yeah, so let me see your hands, those of you that have been writing CSS. Or have we all migrated to Tailwind and forgotten CSS? Have you come across CSS variables? Nice, Rufai. Aisha, awesome, awesome. So notice that CSS variables and Sass variables are different, right? So let's understand in more context what they want us to know. So Sass variables are all compiled away by Sass. And then CSS variables are included in the CSS outputs. So this is how Sass achieve it. Sass variables are compiled away by Sass, then CSS variables are included in the CSS outputs, which is like what Sass compiles down to, right? You know, Sass is just like a higher level of CSS, whereby Sass still compiles down to become CSS. So that's why I told you it's just like a better way of writing CSS. And then CSS variable can have different values for different elements, but Sass variables only have one value at a time. Can you see? So CSS variables can have different values for different elements. But Sass variables only have one value at a time. You can't add multiple to it. So Sass variables are imperative, which means if you use a variable and then change its value, the earlier use will stay the same. CSS variable are declarative, which means if you change the value, it affects both earlier use cases and later use cases. So we can read properly about this, right? So this is just a simple way to declare another variable that holds value 1, which is the value, and then this is the rule, and then we are assigning a value, and then we are imputing the variable here. So default values. Normally, when you assign a value to variable, if that variable already had a value, its old value is overwritten. But if you're writing a Sass library, you might want to allow your users to compare your library's variables before you use them to generate CSS. Yeah, cool. So with Sass, you can be able to build your own CSS. It's like CSS as a service. So you can be able to build your own styled components that already exist, right? And other people can just use them within their code. So that's how Sass works. You can build like your own version of Tailwind. Maybe you don't like some Tailwind components, right? And then you do your own on Sass, and then say you want this to look this way. You want a card to look this way. And then users are going to like run them and compile them within their code, and then it's going to turn to regular CSS and run within their app. So you can use it to generate CSS or build a library. You can build a CSS library with it. So how many of us are interested in building our CSS libraries? And I'm sure we all understand what libraries are now. So if you want to build a library, this is your chance, right? All right, so let's head over. So this is how they look like. And then Sass also have built-in variables. So these are variables that are defined by a built-in module and cannot be modified. So you know that other variables can be modified. Like take, for example, you set a particular color. You can come back to change it to another value, right? But this time around with variables, with built-in variables, they cannot be changed. Anything assigned to them is what is there inbuilt from Sass. So you can see this. This is how to use them. You just use the @use and then Sass, and then you import the particular stuff, and then you use it as this. So when you say as mass, anywhere within your app, you are going to refer to that particular variable as math, and then it's going to perform whatsoever thing you want it to do. So remember, Sass work with things like functions, mixin, and variables. So we also have what we call a scope. And then this same concept in built-in variables exists in normal programming also. So programming have what we call keywords. And then these keywords are the same thing as built-in variables. And then keywords exist. You cannot modify them. Anything a keyword does is what maybe a particular programming language has assigned it to do. And then if you are using that keyword, or when you are trying to work with other things within the program you are building, you are not allowed to use that keyword for anything. Maybe for like naming a variable or anyway, that's just most things you learn within JavaScript when you get deep. But for now, this Sass, and then it's introducing some concepts. Nice. So the next thing is what we call a scope. So a scope, so variables at the top level of the sheet are global. Now a scope, it depends on where a particular variable is being declared within your CSS file, right? So there are different type of scope, and then these are some of the explanation. They say variables at the top level are regarded of the style sheet are global. So what they mean by global is this guy here. So this is an example of a global variable. They created a variable called global variable, and then this is the value. So the value of this particular variable can be accessed anywhere within this file. That is, you can use it here, you can use it inside of content, you can use it inside of sidebar. Any of the different components can be able to use them, right? So this means that they can be accessed anywhere in their module after they have been declared. Nice, what I just explained. But that's not true for all variables. Good. So there are other type of variables, right? And then other type of variables don't have the power that this global variable have. So global variables can be accessed globally. That means anybody can access it. Let's take, for example, within our country, in Nigeria, or let me take Nigeria as an example, right? So Nigeria is the whole country, and then Nigeria has a president, and then Nigeria is also divided into states, right? Which are the different states. So we are going to refer to this global variable as sorry guys, let me just get. Yeah, so sorry guys. So let's get back to this. So I was explaining global variables, and then I told you there are other type of variables, right? And then I was using Nigeria as an example. I told you Nigeria has a president, and then that president, the whole state or the whole different state, whether you are in Abuja, whether you are in Lagos, you are in Jos, you are in Kaduna, you have access to the president, right? Any law that the president pass affects you directly, or if there is any benefits, which reverse is the case, but let me just explain it in that concept. So if there's any benefits, maybe from like the president or from the presidency, from the executive, everybody is going to get it, regardless of the states that you are, right? But it's different for like some other guys, whereby we have sub-states now. So these sub-states are regarded like this particular styling that are used for these blocks. So they are called blocks. Anything declared in these curly braces is called a block, right? That's also a programming concept. You get that when you get to JavaScript. So in this block, I declared a particular variable called a local variable, and then it's inside of this block, right? So this simply means that anybody who is within this block, or any value within this variable, or anything within this block, that's where we can be able to use this variable, because this block starts here and basically ends here. Once this block is being closed, that's the end of it. Nothing exists after that. Do we understand the point? So that's what local variables are for. So this simply means that if a particular law is being set in, let's say, Kaduna State, and they say there's a curfew, so it's only people in Kaduna that will not be moving, right? That's basically what it means. But let's remember, like during the lockdown, whereby there was a general law where everybody has to like stay at home, a stay-at-home order, and like the rest of that, right? We are going to notice that it affected like the whole state, especially like the whole world. But when it comes to smaller things, they are being handled like within the states and then within the locality, and it only affects what is within that locality. And then that's why this is called a local variable and a local value. So anything declared here can only be used within here. It cannot be accessed outside. But anything declared outside here, not inside of a particular block, can have the right or can be accessed anywhere. That's why we can access global value here and we can access global value here, right? Do we get the concept? All right, so, okay, I opened the wrong thing. Nice. So shadowing. So there's a concept called shadowing. So local variables can even be declared with the same name as global variables, right? Good. So if this happens, there are actually two different variables with the same name, one local and one global. This helps ensure that an author writing a local variable doesn't accidentally change their value at a global variable they aren't even aware of. Nice. So what does shadowing mean? Shadowing means that a particular local variable can have, you can have a variable with the same name in, what's it called? In the global state and also in the local state. You get, and then you assign two different values to them. Now, how is that going to work? We can have a global variable here called variable, and then maybe it has a value of maybe a blue color, right? And then inside of this content block, we can choose to have another variable called variable. And then this time around, we can give it maybe orange color as the variable. So what will happen now is that within the whole app, if you are using variable anywhere that is not declared in local, if you are using maybe you are using variable here, it's going to give you the blue color. But in this particular block, we changed it, we shadowed it. That simply means that we switch the value now, and then we say we want variable to be this. So within content, content doesn't know this guy. It only knows this guy. And then it will work with everything that, or the value that this guy always provide to it. But if this doesn't exist inside of content, it's not going to be able to access it. It's going to be accessing this one now, simply because a local variable doesn't exist. So take, for example, in this place, sidebar, this is the variable, or this is the value that is going to be appended. And then within this guy, this is the value. So do we also get the concept of shadowing? Shadowing also works in programming. We understand that concept, right? So if you need to set a global variable's value from a local scope, such as in a mixin, you can use the global flag. That's the exclamations mark and global flag. So a variable declaration flagged as global, we always assign to the global scope. So that simply means that even within the local, you can be able to declare a variable as a global variable and be able to access it within other places, right? So we can see this is a variable, and then it was redeclared here, it was reshadowed here, and then it's going to take effect here. Right, good. So next, the flow control scope. So there are different scopes, right? I told you guys there are block scope. So that's the last one that we explained, this one. This is what we call the block scope, this particular scope. And then this is the global scope, everything within this. Then anything within this curly and close braces is called the block scope. Nice. So the flow control scope. Now there's another scope. So variable declared in control flow in flow control rules, which is a particular rule we are going to learn from SCSS, and it's also a rule that lives in programming, right? So it has special scoping rules. They don't shadow variables at the same level. as the flow control rule. Instead, they just assign to those variables. This means it's much easier to conditionally assign a value to a variable or build up a value as part of a loop. Good. So this makes sense. Like, this is when you want to use variables interchangeably, right? Like, take for example, what will I use as a particular example now? Okay, so take for example, you have a loading spinner that's, or you have a particular button. Yeah, let's work with that. So let's say you are building a game and then it's a guessing game, and then you have a particular button whereby you want a user to, if a user click, so you give the user different alphabets, maybe let's say A, B, C, D, and then you pick one alphabet maybe as the correct alphabet, and then you're asking the user to guess. So maybe I hide C at the back, and then I'm asking the user to guess, like, which is the correct alphabet, if he gets it. So, and then the user then picks B. So if the user clicks the button and he picks B, and then B is wrong, that is B is not equals to C. So remember now, I just use the if word, right? Good. So if the user pick B, I want you to show a red button to tell the user that he is wrong. But then if the user picks C, which is correct, I want you to show the user a green button to show that it is correct. So most of us have interacted with apps, right? And then we understand like how all this thing works, whereby you click a particular button. If something doesn't go through, it tells you with maybe a red alert to tell you that, hey, this doesn't work. Maybe you are trying to log into Facebook and then it sends you a red alert to say that, now, this is wrong. Your password is wrong. Or you are trying to log in and then it's correct, and then it gives you a green access after that to tell you that, hey, you are successfully logged in, right? So that's what we use like the control flow for, to conditionally display a particular color or a particular style in SCSS. And then this is what the flow control scope look like. So I can be able to set a value within this dark theme and then tell it that, hey, if the user selects a dark theme, and then the dark theme is default, so that's what is happening here. So they named 3 variables now: dark theme, primary color, and then accent color. And then they said if the user selects dark theme, which is the default, this should be the primary color, and then this should be the accent color. So basically, that's just what's happening with that. That's what's happening. And then if it's not the dark theme, what now? It should just show like the accent color should be this when you try to set this. Or no, this is just making effect on this particular button. So if it's not dark theme, it should result back to the default, right? So this is the default color. So let's hear from you guys now. We have scrolled a lot. Okay, so let's just read this last part. So variable in flow control scope can assign to existing values in the outer scope, but new variables declared in flow control scope won't be accessible in the outer scope. Make sure the variable is already declared before you assign it. Even if you need to declare it as null. Right? So that's just how the control flow works. Before you are going to use a variable, make sure you declare it. If the variable probably is not within the global scope, and then you want to declare it within the flow control scope. So all you just have to do is declare it first. Even though it doesn't have a value, you can just give it null at first within the global scope. Nice. So they say advanced variable function. The Sass core library provides a couple advanced functions for working with variables. That is the meta variable exists function. It returns whether a variable with the given name exists in the current scope. Okay, so this will give us rights to explain a bit concept about what a function is in programming in general, and then let's understand how it is being used in the concept of Sass. So a function is a set of rules, or a function is a set of rules given to a computer that performs a specific task. Do we get the point? So a function is a set of rules or is a particular code that performs a specific task. So let's take note of that, specific task. That's what functions are used for. So and then they are telling us we can use some particular type of functions which is given to us inbuilt, and they are regarded as advanced function. It's given to us inbuilt by Sass, and then we can be able to access them, right? So one example they say is the method.variable exists, and then what this function does is that it receives a variable and checks if the given name exists in the current scope. So you see, the particular task that this function exists is just to check if returns whether a variable with a given name exists in the current scope. That's just the work that this meta.variable exists function performs, right? So users occasionally want to use interpolation to define a variable name based on another variable, right? So Sass doesn't allow this because it makes it much harder to tell at glance which variables are defined where. What you can do though is define a map which from names to value that you can then access using variables. Yeah, so that's just the concept of interpolation. You can read more about that. And then they said you can be able to use maps to access particular variables depending on the scope. Nice. So that's variables, and then that's one great concept we need to understand within working with what's it called? Sass. Okay, so what is going to happen now is that we are going to head over to our code. Let's go to the normal code we've been writing, and then try to particularize some of these stuffs. So, okay. I think I went to desktop. Yeah. So let me open a brand new window and then head over to our usual application, which is in the desktop, and then first work, right? Yeah. So that should be it. And then I try to open it. Okay, so I have been saving like a bunch of images here. So let me just delete them. Oh. And then I will create a new folder here called SASS, Sass. And then we are going to create a new file. Call it this. So let's call it like maybe like first or index, or let me use like first.sass or trial. Now learning. Picking names are usually very hard. And then let me just try to close most of these tabs so that we can easily navigate. Yeah, so it's just us and this guy. So let's head back to variables and then try all this out, right? So I told you guys this is how to declare a variable. So first and foremost, you use the $sign, and then you state what is the variable name. So this, let's call this my primary color. So just to tell you that you can use anything, right? And then I assign this, and then with this, I can be able to assign a value to it and then use it within the scope. So what's the value I would like to use? So I can just go get colors from colors, which is my usual location. So let's just go to colors here. And then let's start the generator and then pick up the first color we see. And then inside the hashtag, and then declare this as the color, right? So with this, we just declared a variable in Sass or in SCSS, right? And then I told you guys, we also agreed that we can be able to use this variable even within other variables, right? Like take, for example, we can use it here. And then let's say,
Yes, sir. Someone is raising his hand.
okay. Okay, yeah, the person can shoot. Okay, boss. I think he's not aware. So let's just now what will happen. Okay, yeah, he's not aware. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I got disconnected.
Okay.
So please, can you zoom your coding screen, like so that it will help the recording for anyone that is watching the videos later?
Yeah. I completely forgot.
Yeah,
I
thank
always
you.
I always like making my this very, very like tiny so that I can be able to see the whole code, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so this is it. And then this we declare in a particular variable. And then we can call this what now? So I think commenting doesn't work here. That's serious. Okay. So this is example of a global variable, right? And then let's try to declare a local variable. We can do that within a particular block. And then we'll say this is what a block look like, just like our normal styling. So let's say we are trying to style an alert class. We can be able to use the variable here to assign the color. So we can just say the background color. And then we assign what? And we are good to go. Right? So that's it. And then we can use the variable. So this is we using the primary color, which is a global variable here. And then we can be able to use this my primary color and in any of the blocks at all, right? And then I told you guys there are what we call local variables, and then this is what local variables look like. So local variables look like this. I can choose to set a local variable here. So let's say my local color, and then I'll choose to give it a value here, right? So let's head over to colors again. and pick the next color that came to my mind, and then paste it here. Right? So with this, I can be able to use my local color within this particular local variable and also use it within background color, within the global scope. No, sorry. I meant I could be able to use my local color within this particular block, and then I can be able to access this global color anywhere. So next, I can be able to set maybe a particular color for this, and then I can just set it and say my local color, and there you go. That me creating variables and using them in Sass, right? So, now this particular my local color cannot be accessed anywhere aside this particular block. That simply means I cannot be able to use my local color here. I can't be able to access it. Or I can't be able to create a new, let's say, block scope and then use my local color. If I have to do that, then I have to redeclare it again, simply because the lifespan of my local color exists only here. And then we talked about the global pattern, right? So that's just it for variables. You can read deep and understand basically what they do. So next, let's go back and try to check out more stuffs. So we said after variables, you can also use, it allows us to use nested rules, right? So what do nested rules look like? Let's click in and check on. So style rules. So style rules are the foundation of Sass, just like they are for CSS. And they work the same way. You choose which element to style with a selector and declare properties that affect how those elements look. That's the style rule, right? This particular thing we are working with. This is what's regarded as the style rule. Same that works in SCSS, same works in the normal CSS. And that's what we're using here. The same thing. It's not different from what you know. I think the only different thing you learned today for now is just variables, right? And they are not much of like a big concept to understand. So this is the style rule. So nesting now. So, but Sass wants to make your life easier, and then that's why nesting is being introduced. Rather than repeating the same colors, rather than repeating same select over and over again, you can write one style rule inside another. Sass will automatically combine the outer rule selector with the inner rules, right? So that's like the big thing that this guy does. So you can be able to nest your styles basically, and that's what we are doing here. So we declared a particular nav bar. This is a block. So we are styling the whole nav bar, and then you see this selector now is for a nav element, and then we are selecting a U or an unordered list inside of this nav bar. And then the unordered list, we are giving it this particular styles, which is also in this block. And then we declared another block of the LI, that is the list that exists inside of this UL, right? And then we give them this display of inline block. And then finally, we are styling the anchor tags or the hrefs, the hyperlinks, which are used to access like other parts within our app, and then we gave them this style. So that's just how nesting works. We are trying to say that this nav bar, you can be able to assign other sub styles within this nav bar, like this guy, the UL styling, and then the anchor tag styling, right? So heads up, nested rules are super helpful, but they can also make it hard to visualize how much CSS you are actually creating. So the deeper you nest, Yeah. All right, guys. Uh, I'm so sorry once again. All right, guys. So we are good to go. Nice. So someone just communicated and it's good news. So I had to just give a quick reply to say I'm in a class. All right. So this is the heads up. So nested rules are super helpful. And then just like what they said, they say it can be like very hard at the end of the day because we don't know how much CSS we are actually degenerating by going deeper and doing nested styling, right? So the more in depth your styling is, like the more bandwidth it takes to serve your CSS. And that's what we don't want, right? Nobody wants his app to be slow at all. Or do you? Have you been to an app and then it's slow and then you are still there? So let me give you a result of one survey that was run. And then the average time a user can spend waiting for your app to load is just 3 seconds, even less than. Some of us don't even have patience of up to 3 seconds. Like they consider 3 seconds like 3 hours waiting for that thing to start up. Everyone wants it to be fast, smooth as possible. So that's why you might want to run away from like nested nested styles, simply because don't go deep while nesting. That's just the truth. Maybe you might just do some shallow nesting. Don't go deep and be styling components inside another one, inside another element. It's going to be turn out to be like a lot of trouble for you. Right? So nice. Okay, so selectors lists. So nested rules are clever about handling selectors lists. That is comma separated selectors. So you can have lists, you can select a bunch of elements, even in CSS, and then give them the same style. But then they are telling you that SCSS is careful how they handle it. So each complex selector, the ones between the comma, is nested separately, and then they are combined back into a selector. So you see, we're using this for the alert and warning. And then inside we are nesting another style for the UL and for the paragraph tags. You see. So selector combinators, you can nest selectors that use combinators as well. You can put the combinator at the end of the outer selector, at the beginning of the inner selector, or even all on its own in between the two. So this we're doing a particular style for the UL, and then nesting this li in it, and then doing this guy. So just some bunch of advanced concepts that I myself haven't even used. So interpolation, or let's read advanced nesting. So if you want to do more with your nested styles rules than just combine them in order with descendant combinator, that is a plain space separating them, Sass has your back. So parent selector documentation, that's for the guys that wants to go deep into nesting advanced selectors, right? So interpolation now. You can use interpolation to inject values from expressions like variables and function calls into your selectors. This is particularly useful when you are writing mixins, since it allows you to create selectors from parameters your users pass in. So that's for mixing and for interpolation. And then we'll go proper into this when we start writing the code, right? So we understand how nested rules works, right? How you can be able to nest styles into other styles, code blocks into other. So let's see mixing. So mixing and at include. So mixin allows you to define styles that can be reused throughout your style sheet. They make it easy to avoid using non-semantic classes like .float left and to redistribute collection of styles in libraries. So mixin are defined using the mixin rule, which is written at mixin. So this is it. Or at mixin, then the name and then the arguments. Then you write the block. So a mixin's name can be any Sass identifier that doesn't begin with dash dash. So it shouldn't begin with that. And it can contain any statement other than the top level statements. They can be used to encapsulate styles that can be dropped into a single style rule. They can contain style rules of their own that can be nested in the other rules or included at the top level of the style sheet, or they can just have to modify variables. Mixins are included into the current context using the include rule, which is written as include or this. So basically, this is just how mixins are being created. At mixin, give it a particular name and then make sure it doesn't start with dash dash. And then you insert the styling. You can also use this as include in it, right? So what is happening is that we declared this particular style as a mixin and then gave it a name, reset list. And then we also created another mixin called horizontal list. And then we are including the style of reset list inside of it. So like that's you having a mixin inside of another one using this include. So when I say include reset list, all the styles that is being appended here is also going to be here. Do we get the point? And then within this li, then so that's just how it works. And then we can choose to also style maybe our navbar and our UL and then include horizontal list in it. And then horizontal list has like this whole style, which also includes reset list inside. So this guy referencing this guy and this guy referencing this guy all to give us one particular list. And then with this, you can see that we can be able to reuse our codes into smaller components easily. And then it's much fun and much more sweeter now to write CSS, whereby you don't have to declare like bunch of style. You can just do a particular style for a button, and then maybe you have a button and another element, and then you are taking the style in there to include it and stuff like that, right? So anybody has any question for now? If there's no question, you can just give me your emojis so I can move on to be sure that you all are listening to me. Okay. All right, Bolaji, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so good morning. Thank you for your efforts so far. I really appreciate them. They are really helpful. So concerning the SASS, yeah, sure. So I want to ask, is it different from the normal CSS we used to know? What's the difference?
Okay, so it's not different from the normal CSS, you know, but this time around, it's a high level of the CSS that you know. So it introduces programming concepts like variables, nested rules, if statements, and bunch of them, scopes, etc., to be able to make writing CSS easier. And then you can be able to inject your CSS styles on the go within your elements. So it's the same CSS, but you writing it with programming logic, right? Because your app might have some particular behaviors, and then you want the styles to be changing within the app based on what you do. Or aside that, you can be able to declare like global variables for particular elements or particular styles so that you can be able to always access them. Or mixing that can help you to use like reusable components. That's what SCSS is for. It's just to make CSS life easier, but it's the same CSS at the end of the day.
Okay, but since we haven't tabled, do we still need SCSS?
Yeah, cool. So I think you came late because that's why I was explaining the concept. And then I told you guys that you can use all the three within your app if you want. It depends on you. It depends on what makes your life easier. It depends on what you want to achieve and how fast you want to do it and which tool you know how to use best to achieve it, right? But if you want to use Tailwind, normal CSS, Sass within a particular app, kudos. If you want to use two, fine. If you want to use only one, no problem. It depends on you. But as a programmer, it's best if you are flexible and you are familiar with like a lot of concepts. It helps. So are we good to go?
Yeah,
Nice. Any
sure.
more questions?
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Chetru.
Yes, sir. Please, sir, I would like you to go back to the little SAS documents that you just created, if it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the primary color, I believe, according to what you said, is the global variable. And then within the code blocks, we have a local variable, and then you still called the primary color, which is the global variable. Now, how do I want to put it? The local color will be I don't, is it going to be what the code blocks will respond to? Because the primary color is still within the code block, and then the code block is um a local color. I don't know whether you understand what I'm saying. So which one will override the other in this situation? I don't know whether I'm placing the question there correctly, but I know that there is a local color and a global color within the code block.
Yeah, cool. So what's wait, let me check my mic. Okay, cool. Yeah, so what's happening here is just that each of these color, each of these styles, no one is overriding the other. No variable is overriding another variable here. So all the variables are existing independent of each other. But I'm using the two different variables to explain for you the global scope and also the local scope. And then I'm going to start from the local scope. And then I say local scope are variables that exist within a particular block or code block. And then these variables can only exist within that block and cannot be used outside of it. And that's why I declared this my local color and then set this particular color to it as a local variable. And then I used it here to set a color for that particular element. Next, there's a global variable, and then this variable, unlike the local variable, can be accessed anywhere or within any block. And then I use Nigeria as an example. And then I told you if the presidency pass a law, anything that the presidency says is going to affect all the different states within Nigeria. And then these different states are regarded as these blocks, right? So if any changes that happen here, and if they are being appended to any of these states, it's going to make a particular change to it. But the local variable now, if a particular state sets a law that is peculiar to them, it only applies to that state. Like take for example, if there is curfew in Kaduna, that doesn't mean that there won't be movement in Jos. But if the federal government of Nigeria says there's no movement within the whole Nigeria, then obviously what it means is that either in Jos or Kaduna or anywhere you go, it's the same thing, right? So what I'm trying to say is that this global scope is like the presidency in this level, whereby any changes that is here or anything that happens here can be used to make changes to these states. But anything that happens inside of these states and is peculiar to them cannot affect another different state. That's just what I mean by the local and global variable. And then global variables are declared outside of the blocks. And then local variables are declared inside of the blocks. Is this okay?
Yes, sir. It's clear. Thank you.
Nice. So let's proceed. Ah, so we see how mixins include works, etc. Right? So arguments. So let's read this fun fact. So fun fact, mixing names like all Sass identifiers, threatening hyphens and underscores as identifiers. Yes, this means that reset list and reset list both refers to the same mixing. This is historical holdover from the very early days of Sass, when it only allowed underscores in identifier names. Once Sass added support for hyphens to match CSS syntax, the two were made equivalent to make migration easier. Awesome. So they are trying to warn us here and then give us a fun fact that if we create maybe a particular mixin and give it a name reset list using this dash, and then also create this one as reset list, give it underscore, it's going to refer to it as the same thing and it might have a clash. So I can create reset list and then still refer to it as reset underscore list somewhere, and then it's going to work. Simply because Sass treats underscores and hyphens as the same thing. This is due to some backward compatibility stuff. So, arguments. Mixing can also take arguments, right? Just like functions in JavaScript or any programming language, they can be able to take arguments. Now, what are arguments? So, arguments which allows their behaviors to be customized each time they are called. So the arguments are specified in the @mixin rule after the mixin name as a list of variable names surrounded by parentheses. The mixin must then be included with the same number of arguments in the form of Sass script expressions. The values of these expressions are available within the mixin's body as the corresponding variables, as you can see. Sass, these are arguments. You see, the first time we didn't declare with these guys. And then what are these arguments are for? So these arguments are used to determine the behavior of maybe a particular mixin. That is, if I want to append maybe a particular style to a mixin, it might comes with arguments, and then these arguments are predefined colors. So I might redeclare this mixin with different arguments, and it's going to take different styling. Like take, for example, I might have a card that is width of 100 px. And then to form this card, I'm using a mixin and then appending all these styles to it. And then I want to make a card that is much more smaller than the just made card that I made. And then this time around, I still want to use the same mixin since I have the model of how I want the card to look like. But this time around, I just want the card to be smaller. So if the card accepts a argument of length, so the length, any length I pass is going to determine the length of the new card that is going to be created. So this simply means I can create a card and give it a height of 100 px, create another card, give it a height of 20 px, and it will be 5 times smaller than the first card that I created of 100 px. I can create a card and make it size of 500 px, and it will be 5 times larger than the card that I made using 100 px. Are we together? And do we get the concept of arguments and what they are used for? Nice. David, Rufai, what's up?
Sorry, please. Can you please explain the concept of argument again, please?
Okay. So arguments are simple terms. As a programmer, you'll be making use of these terms always in programming. When you start writing JavaScript or when you start writing other programming languages like Python, Solidity, etc. And then what are these arguments are for? So arguments can be used to like set a particular value that you want within the concept of programming. You can say they are used to set the particular values that you want to run within a function block. Like take, for example, you have a function add, and then function add does 2 plus 2, right? So every time you call function add, it does 2 plus 2 and it gives you 4. But this time around, you want to create, you want to do 4 plus 4, right? And then you already have a component that already does addition, which is the 2 plus 2 function. But this time you want to do 4 plus 4. How can you make this better? You can just create the first function that is working with an argument. You can just make it to accept arguments and tell it, okay, instead of doing 2 plus 2, do A plus B. And then you will pass A and B as arguments into that particular function. If you pass A and B as arguments to that function, anytime a user calls that function and it passes arguments A and B, the function is going to run A plus B and return the value to him. So take, for example, if I call the addition function and then the argument A, I say 2, and then argument B, I say 2. That is, in the function block, is going to run 2 plus 2, and then the result is going to be 4. And then next, I can be able to work with another function, another different set of arguments, maybe like 4 plus 4. And then I might just tell the addition function, okay, work with argument 4 plus 4, and then give me the result. And then deep down is going to run 4 plus 4, which is A plus B, and then it's going to give us the result of 8. Did I explain this or did I confuse you the more? Are you sure, Rufai?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Okay, Ruben is not satisfied. Ruben is confused now, right? Okay, I saw a thumbs down. All right, so let's move forward. So what next? Head over here and then see the concept of argument. So you can see we are declaring this particular mixin and we are passing arguments of property, a LTR value, and RTL value, right? And then all these values have been appended to the different properties. So argument lists can also have trailing commas. This makes it easier to avoid syntax error when refactoring your style sheet. So optional arguments. Normally, every argument a mixin declares must be passed with the mixin is included. However, you can make an argument optional by defining a default value, which will be used if the argument isn't passed. So default values are the same syntax as variable declaration. The variable name followed by a column and a Sass script expression. This makes it easier to define flexible mixin APIs that can be used in simple or complex ways. So that's just how to work with optional arguments. And then you can see how optional arguments work, right? So you have this mixin, this is the replace text, which is a mixin. And then these are the arguments, right? You pass an image and then you pass X and Y, 50%, 50%, right? So these are the values, these are the arguments passed to this. But then we have what is called optional arguments, which I can choose not to append a particular style to this, or not to put this particular argument, maybe Y or X. And then the only way I can achieve this is that, okay, when the mixin is running, the mixin will check, hey, did this guy supply X? Did he supply Y? Okay, he didn't supply X. Now, what does he want me to work with? So I need to have another different variable within my mixin now. And then it's going to hold like the default value that if I do not append this particular size, maybe give it this particular size. If I don't specify a color, give it this particular color. That's simply like what it means, right? Like take for example, in your CSS, while you're working with it, right? How does it work when you are styling? It's simple. It says, hey, if this guy doesn't append any color, any background color to this website, just make the background color white. And that's what it means by optional arguments. Are we good to go? Nice. Okay. So in this class, we'll not be doing like much of the coding stuff, simply because most of the practical stuffs are going to be done in the next class, where we are going to have like a unified template that we are all going to look through, dissect, and try to debug more. But for now, this is just how S or SAS works, right? So fun fact, default values can be any SAS script expression, and they can even refer to earlier arguments. So the default value can even be earlier arguments, right? So when a mixin is included, so this for keyword arguments, when a mixin is included, arguments can be passed by name in addition to passing them by their position in the argument list. This is especially useful for mixing with multiple optional arguments or with Boolean. So arguments whose meaning aren't obvious without a name to go with them. Keyword arguments use the same syntax as variable declaration and optional arguments. So that's what keyword arguments are for. So what are some examples? So heads up, because any argument can be passed by name, be careful when renaming a mixin argument. Good. So you should be careful when renaming a mixin argument. It might break your users. It can be helpful to keep the old name around and optional argument for a while and printing a warning if anyone passes it. All right, so how about taking arbitrary arguments? So sometimes it's useful for mixin to be able to take any number of arguments. Good. If the last argument in a mixin declaration ends in ... then all extra arguments to that mixin are passed to the argument as a list. This argument is known as an argument list. Good. So you can choose to create a listing, a mixin, and then within that, you don't want to declare all the arguments. You only want to declare like only a few arguments, and then you don't know the subsequent argument that you might particularly add. So what will happen is that at the end of the day, when declaring the argument, it can end in these triple dots, which means that, hey, I don't know like the remaining arguments was going to be, but later on I will pass in more arguments, right? And then when I do, just refer to them, any argument I pass, refer to them in a list, find them within that list, and append those styles to styling. So basically, that's just how this works, right? Yeah. So passing arbitrary arguments. So let's just head over to content blocks. So in addition to taking arguments, a mixin can take an entire block of styles known as content block. A mixin can declare that it takes a content block by including the @content rule in its body. The content block is passed in used curly braces, like any other block in SAS. And it's injected in place of the content rule, right? So that's just how the content block works. This is a whole content block, yeah, being appended to this, to a particular mixin. So a mixin can include multiple @content rules. As you can see, this is a mixin hover, is being included inside of this whole content block. So it does the content block. If it does, the content block will be included separately for each ad content. So heads up, a content block is lexically scoped, which means it can only see local variables in the local scope where the mixin is included. It can't see any variables that are defined in mixin. It's passed to. So even if they are not defined before the content block is invoked. So while using Sass, you need to be careful and always read this heads up to understand the concept of what you might be achieving, because you might be trying to do something and then it doesn't work, right? And then this is where they explain that concept. Nice. So let's keep going. What's next? So there are other stuffs we still have to assess. Wow. Like function, the extend, error, warned, at roots, etc. We need to check them out. So this for indented mixin syntax. So I wanted to skip this, but indentation is very important because it makes your code cleaner. So can you see how this one looks much more cleaner? But probably it's trying to achieve like the same thing with this guy. Yeah, so let's just explain. So the indented syntax has a special syntax for defining and using mixins. In addition to the standard at mixin and at include, mixins are defined using the character equals to, and they are included using plus. So although this syntax is teaser, it's also harder to understand at a glance, and users are encouraged to avoid it. Right? Oh, nice. So you see, you are even encouraged to avoid indented mixin syntax. Nice. So that means we shouldn't jump and do this because it's a bit hard. And then they say it's harder to understand in a glance, right? So, but then this is just them declaring a mixin with a reset list, appending this. And then this is another new mixin that says horizontal list. And then they are including the reset list into this. And then this is a code block of the LI that has this particular styles in it. So if you ask me, indentation makes sense and this looks better, right? But it's just for guys who are already used to using like the normal concepts that they know already, right? So those are the people they are warning. Now, so let's head over to the next concept, functions. So functions are very, very important in programming. Like I told you what functions are. I said functions are a set of rules that do what? That perform a specific task, right? So let's see, same built-in modules. Okay, so Sass provides many built-in modules which contain useful functions and the occasional mixin. These modules can be loaded with the @use rule, like any other defined style sheet. And their function can be called like any other module member. All built-in module URLs begin with Sass and then this. So this is how to call a particular module to indicate that they are part of Sass itself, right? That shows that they are built-in modules. So aside from built-in keywords, like I explained, that exist directly within them, within Sass, there are also built-in modules that Sass have already created for us. And then these built-in modules have functions inside of them that we can be able to use. And then depending on the module that we want to make use of, we just insert the type of the module, and then we insert the module itself. Like we saw this guy, color. Initially, we saw module math. So now we are going to check like what this built-in module does individually and then explore. So heads up, before the Sass modules system was introduced, all Sass functions were globally available at all times. Good. So many functions still have global alliances. That is, modules just help to modularize your functions instead of leaving all your functions within a global scope. Good. So the Sass scheme discourages their use and will eventually deprecate them. But for now, they remain available for compatibility with the older Sass versions and the libsass, which doesn't support the module system yet. So there are other versions of Sass that do not support like the module system currently. And then there are there are modules that there are functions that exist within these global modules. So they don't exist in smaller modules, right? And then they are saying Sass are going to deprecate them with time. So a few functions are only available globally, even in the new module system. Either because they have special evaluation behavior, like if, or because they add extra behavior on top of built-in CSS functions, like RGB and HSL. So here, this will not be deprecated and can be used freely. So these are some few functions. So from few of the global functions are not going to be deprecated. Now, how do we make use of modules? This is an example of one. We make use of this at use to say that, hey, this particular module is from Sass, and this is how we declare it. And then the module we are declaring now is the color module. So how can we make use of this? So let's take a look. Inbuilt functions. We said this module give us inbuilt function. So we created this style block, and then this style block is of button. And then we head over to this guy, which has like a whole border. And then this is where they use the global or the input style now. What did they do here? They said, hey, it's a border of 1px, right? They are setting a border of 1px and it's solid. And then this time around, to set the color, they are making use of a function called scale. And then scale is assessing primary color. And then primary color is what? So what is primary color within this scope? Somebody need to tell me so I know that my explanation are not going in vain. What is primary color within the scope or within this primary color used here?
So a local variable.
Nice. I like that. Who is that? Is that Aisha?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Okay. So it's a local variable, and then this is it, simply because it is declared here inside of this button, right? And it's not declared outside. So, and then it's being used here, and then we use this scale to append a color. And then we also have this guy, lightness, appending 20% to it. So Sass provides the following built-in modules, which is the Sass math module. So this is the math module. It provides functions that operate as numbers, that operate on numbers. So if you want to work on numbers, you can use the Sass math module, right? So the Sass string module makes it easy to combine search or split apart strings. Do we know what strings are? How many of us have done like extra study? Let me see the guys that are already learning JavaScript. How many of us know what strings are? Okay, yeah. A lot of people know what strings are. Makes sense. So for those that don't know what strings are, so strings are just the normal alphabets or numbers, or they could be symbols that are declared inside of double quotes or single quotes. That's in JavaScript. And then it's referred to as a particular data type that is being regarded as text. So if you have a particular text that you want to write, it is being declared in strings. So that's just what strings are. All right, cool. So somebody sending some docs. What's this for? Or is this the attendance form? All right, I think so. Awesome. So let's proceed. So we also have the color guide, which we are currently making use of. And then the color module generates new colors based on existing ones. Make it easy to build colors themes, right? So you know what themes are. Themes like a particular template that you work with. And then we have like the list, the Sass list module, which lets you access and modify values in lists. You have the Sass math module, which makes it possible to look up the value associated with a key in a map, and much more. So the Sass selector module provides access to Sass powerful selector engine. The Sass meta module exposes the details of Sass inner workings. So this is for the Sass meta module, right? Good. So global functions. You can pass special functions like calc or var in places of any argument to global color constructors. That's global. So global functions are functions given to you by Sass that can be accessed anywhere without having to go into these what's it called? These modules. So like take for example, if I want to get a scale for a particular color, I have to go through the Sass color module and be able to access like the scale functionality, right? But the global variables are given to me without having to go deep into these modules, just like how you understand the concept of variables, global and local. So you have special functions like calc for calculations, var to set a particular variable, that are global constructors, right? And then you can use them this way. Like when we're working with this scale, can you notice we had to say we had to say color dot scale before we're able to access scale. We called color first. But this time around, in this case, all you just have to do is declare like the particular style without having to go between anything. All I just have to do is just say color. All I just have to do is say var to declare that this is a variable, right? And then work with it. So there are other ones you can still work with, right? So heads up, Sass special passing rules for slash values make it difficult to pass values for lightness or alpha. This is some concept you should read yourself, so we don't waste much of our time, right? And then this is just how most of these guys work, and then this is for Sass color. So I can choose to go deep, and then let's check out. So this is the Sass color, and then you can be able to see all the different things that they can be used for. So increases or decreases one or more channels of color by fixed amount. That's what they do. So you can see the color scale for fluidly scaling a color property. That's what the scale function is used for. We also have the color change for setting a color's property. You use color change. So you can input this and then work with them. You have adjust. And then that's what they are used for, right? So scale adjust is for adjusting a color property by fixed amount. So the particular amounts that you fix, you can be able to adjust them, right? You can get the channel, you can complement, etc, right? So you just have to go deep, understand how these colors work. As you can see, it's a long road down the whole stuff, and then there are a bunch of these functions that you can be able to make use of. So if you are interested in using or want to go deep into it, I will employ everyone to use it, right? So that you have a feel of how it works, so that you can go deep into it, understand the concept all by yourself. All right, so let's head over to Sass list. We have seen the first module, which is color. So this module is now for lists. So remember, if you want to append or bring it, you use the Sass and then you put your semicolon or your colon and then you insert list. So fun fact, in Sass, every map counts as a list that contains a 2 elements list for each key value pair. For example, one is a key, 2 for counts as 1, 2, 3, 4. So all these functions work for map as well. So what are some of the methods you can use for list? You can append, since it's a list of data. So you appending is just like you adding to that particular list. So returns a copy of the list with val added to the end. Nice. So appending is you adding another thing to the end of that particular list. So index. So return the index of the value in the list. So you have bunch of list of data. So do we know what index are for? Have any of us gone deep to understand index? Because that's like an important concept. Index, like the normal index we know in mathematics. Okay, so index refers to the particular position that an item is in a list of data. So let's take, for example, we have like 20 data in a particular list, or the 20 list of students of this class. So at the end of the day, what is happening is that each student is going to have an index. So the first student, which is 1, his index is 1. The second index student, which is number 2, his index is going to be 2. So that's what is regarded to as index, right? So you understand that properly in programming when you get deep into JavaScript and then you are hovering over its concept. But for now, let's keep going. So lists have other concepts like aside the index, we can be able to check if it's bracketed. So returns whether the list has a square bracket. So this is what a square bracket looks like. So if we call this method list.is bracketed on this particular list of data, 1px, 2px, 3px, it returns false simply because it's not inside of a square bracket. But then if we try to run this particular method, which is on list, and then we run is bracketed inside a data that is inside of a square bracket, we can see that the function is going to return true. That says that, yeah, this guy is bracketed. So other stuffs, I can do list.join. So I can be able to join a particular list. Probably I have 2 different lists, 3 different lists. Let's say we have a list for the total amount of students in the morning class, and then we have a total amount of lists for the students in the afternoon class, and then we want to do a comparison to know all the students we have in our class. All we just have to do is join the 2 lists together, right? To know the student that are in morning and to know the student that are in afternoon. Awesome. So this returns a list containing the elements of list 1, following by the elements of list 2. So if you join 2 lists, the elements of the first list will come first, and then the elements of the second list will come second. So that simply means that if Phytech is going to have like a 2-way list for the both students in morning and afternoon class, basically what is going to happen is that all the students in the morning class are first on the list, and then subsequently all the students in the afternoon class will then start appearing on the list. And then we can keep appending to the list. This is we joining, and then we can check like the total length of the list, right? So maybe we have a list of data and then we want to know, hey, how many students exist in these 2 classes? We can be able to join it, and then we can be able to get the length, and that will help us to get like the length of the students. And then maybe it tells us, hey, we have 40 students, and then we can be able to know, okay, out of these 40 students, how many students come in the afternoon, or how many students are morning students? So what will happen is we can use the length property to assess the students or the variable of students that exist in the morning class, and then it's going to return a particular length for us. And with that, we are good to go. So we can identify a separator. So it returns the separator used by the list. So lists can use like different separators, right? You can separate with comma, you can separate with a slash or a space. Like this guy, 1px, 2px is a particular list, but this time around it is separated with a space, right? This guy is separated with a comma, as you can see. It is, right? So next, you can choose to also know like We can choose to also know like the last value in a particular list. So that's what the list.end stands for. And then this method accepts a particular list and then it returns the nth value. So it returns the list at the index of n. So n simply means the last guy, right? So if n is negative, it counts from the end of the list. So if you use a negative value of n, so the counting is going to return, that is if I say n is going to return the first value. Maybe I say minus n. But then if I say, so you can choose to put a particular value, let's say is the third value I want. So the value at index 8. So I can just put 8, just like in this context. We are highlighting that, hey, we have a list of this data, and then we are saying we want the value at the value of 2, at the end of 2, right? And the end of 2 is 12. So because this is 1 and then this is 2, this is the second value, right? And then when we say minus 1, it returns what my line 3, which is basically from the end. Nice. So list.slash returns a slash separated list that contains dollar elements. So heads up, the function is temporary solution for creating slash separated lists. Eventually, they will be written literally with slashes, as in 1px, 2px solid. But for time being, slashes are used for divisions. So Sass can use them for new syntax until the old syntax is what removed. We get the point. So list.zip, it combines every list in the list into a single list of sublists. Each element in the return list contains all the elements at the position in the list. The return list is as long as the shortest list in the dollar list. The return list is always comma separated and the sublists are always separated. Those are the different type of lists we might have, right? And then we can use the zip to achieve that. So that is for like the next method, which is sas.list. So let's head over to the next, which is map. And the map is also a module on its own. So we understand all the different concepts. And then I expect you guys to go read and then try these things out so that you can be able to, in the next class, when we are going through the coding session, we can be able to achieve this and then we'll understand all the concepts that we are working with. Because in as much as all of these guys are CSS and they're trying to just enhance CSS in a special way, they have their own different terminologies, though sometimes they seem to be the same, but they have their own different terminologies and their own different terms that can be used, right? So, fun fact, SAS libraries and design systems tend to share and override configurations that are represented as nested maps. So, map that contains maps. That's what nested maps are for. So, to help you work with nested maps, so map functions support deep operations. For example, if you pass multiple keys to map.get, it will follow these keys to find the desired nested map. So this remapping, and then we are saying map.get config. Now what is config? Config is A, and then A is a map that has B, and then B is a map that has C in it, and then C at the end of the day has D in it. So we can be able to map to get config, which is D, and then it maps through this and gets the final guy. You can do a deep merge. So except identical to map.merge, except that nested maps values are also recursively merged. So that's what all these are used for. We can do a deep remove. So these are just like a bit concept that are tricky for now. But if we start using like the smaller stuffs, we understand basically what all these are doing, right? So let's check math now. So this is the math module. So the closest 64-bit floating point approximately to the mathematical constant E. So we are trying to get this, which is math.exponential or E, and then it's returning this value for us. We can also say epsilon. So the difference between 1 and the smallest 64-bit floating point number greater than 1 according to the floating point comparison. So that's what that one is used for. We can use this to do math.max number. It returns the maximum finite number that can be represented as a 64-bit floating point number, right? So we understand the concept now. Math.max number, max number is the max number that can be created in 64 bits floating point. That is, it doesn't have any decimals. So the maximum integer n such that both n and this is math safe integer. So this is the maximum integer such that both n and n plus 1 can be precisely represented as a 64-bit floating point number. So safe integer, that's what it looks like, right? So it's a maximum integer between n and n plus 1. So math.min number, the smallest positive number that can be represented by 64-bit floating point number. Because SAS numbers 10 digits of precision, in many cases, this will appear to be 0. Nice. So when you say math.min number, the minimum number in positive terms is always refers to as 0, right? So it gets that for you most times as the mean number. So mean safe integer, this is the minimum integer n such that both n and n minus 1 can be precisely represented as 64-bit floating point number. So n and n minus 1. And then at the end of the day, it can return minus that whole large number. And so we have math.pi. So this is the closest 64-bit floating point approximation of the mathematical construct pi. Nice. So you can see it returns the pi value, which is 3.14159, approximately 3.142, which is also converted to be 22/7, right? And that is the math.pi stuff. So we also have rounding functions, which can be able to round. So these are mathematical functions, right? If you remember your normal mathematics, we have rounding, right? Or no, this is bounding functions. So what it does, what bounds function does is that it rounds number up to the nearest highest whole number. Same thing as rounding in mathematics. So take, for example, I give it a point, an integer or a particular number that says like 4.2 or 4.5. It's going to round it to the highest integer next to 4.2, which is what? 5. And that's what is done in this example. So to be able to achieve this, you make use of this method, which is CAIL, CAIL, and then you pass in the particular parameter inside of it. And then this happens in cases whereby maybe you want to approximate and use a particular value, right? So you can work with that. So math.clamp. So what does it do? It accepts mean, number, syntax. So that means this guy accepts arguments too. What happens is that it restricts number to the range between minimum and max. If number is less than mean, this returns mean. And if it's greater than max, this returns max. So mean and number and max must have compactable units or all be unitless. That's it. And then that's how it works. So we have the math.clamp, minimum, maximum. Nice. So this is a very nice concept that also works in programming. And then that's math.floor. We're going to be using that in JavaScript also. So math.floor, it rounds the number down to the lowest whole number. So take, for example, if you provide 4.2, remember in this other guy, in bounding, which is seal, it rounds it to the highest number closest to it, right? But this time around with floor, it takes it down. So when you say 4.2, it's going to round it down to 4. When you say 4.9, it rounds it down to 3 and 4. When you say 3.2, it rounds it down to 3. When you say 3.5, it rounds it down to 3. That's how it works. The closest whole number, but then rounding it down. So math.max, and then we have some group of or list of numbers. So it returns the highest of one or more numbers. Good. So if I call the max and then I pass in 2 numbers, 3 numbers, 4 numbers into it, it's going to return the maximum inside all of them. Like take for example, let's say I call max of max and then I say 1px, 4px, it's going to return 4px because 4px is what? Is the maximum between 1 and 4. And then you can say these are the particular widths that you have, and then you are returning the marks of these widths, and that's what you want to set as like the value, right? And then in these widths you supply 50, 30px and 100px. So when you are writing this, it returns 100px. That's how the mode works. We have math.min, which does like the exact opposite of max, and that is to return like the lowest number in the set or in the list of values. This is mouse.round. It returns the nearest whole number. This distant functions. It returns the absolute value of number. If the number is negative, this returns minus number. And if number is positive, it returns number as is. So we do this. And if you say math.apps, if it's positive, it still gives you 10px. But if you use the apps and then you say it's negative, it's still going to give you 10px. And that's how it works. So I think let me just try to check the playground. Okay, so this is just where to write it, and then this is where it compiles down to the normal CSS that we use every day. So you can also make use of this playground to do some stuffs, and then try to see how SCSS compiles down to the normal CSS that you know. So that's why I told you it's just an advanced level of writing CSS. Okay. So that's what it does. It does abs return the absolute value of the number, right? So math.hypot. So it returns the length of the n dimension vector that has components equal to each number. For example, for the 3 numbers a, b, c, this returns the square root of a square plus b square plus c square, right? That's what map.highnot does. The numbers must either have compatible units or all be unitless. And since the number units may differ, the output takes the unit of the first number. So I've really like been talking for long. I want you guys to speak now. Somebody's leaving tailwind for that's mad though. Okay. So I've been talking for long and I'm really tired currently. So I want you guys to speak a little. Let's hear what you've learned so far about all the different concepts. Just let me know before I can proceed, because to be honest, I'm exhausted right now and I'm going to get water. So if you don't want me to break down, you have to speak so that we'll just take some time to just get a glimpse of what you've learned about SCSS, and you can be able to like compare it with the normal CSS, or if you can't, or you can be able to compare it with Tailwind, it's fine. But if you can't, I will advise you just explain what you understand so far. Nice. To go bed. Let's hear from you while I get water. Well, I can hear you.
Good morning, bro. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure, I can.
My question here is, I think the syntax of SCSS and Sass, they are a little bit different from each other. Do you understand my question?
Oh, was that your question or a statement? Yeah, come again with your question, please.
See that I think like from what I'm seeing in the playground, like the SCSS, the syntax of XCSS is a kind of related to normal CSS, but the Sass itself don't have this curly braces of stuff that we normally use in CSS.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just basically the same thing with just a little bit of extendability, like just to add more functionalities. But at the end of the day, even the CSS, SCSS itself still compiles down to be normal CSS. But the syntax in writing both of them are very much similar. So great observation. And Chukobed has understood that they are very similar in syntax. So let's hear from the next person. Yeah, Jethro, shoot.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for giving us an insight about this particular concept. But I want to really ask about use cases. You actually mentioned that in a project we can actually use our normal vanilla, Tailwind, and then Sass. But the use cases I want to know is that when is it more appropriate for us to use Sass to build projects, like the use cases, the most appropriate time to use it?
Okay. So if you ask me, if you just want to build like something bare minimum, just work with your Tailwind and your normal CSS. But then if there are certain kinds of components that you want to introduce and then you want to keep reusing them, maybe your app is very bit robust, and then you have components that you want to keep reusing, and then depending on the particular style or the particular control flow, you append the style to it. I will advise you make use of SCSS or Sass. Yeah. But if you just want to do something plain, something minimum, that you don't have a bunch of components that are going to be reusable, you do it with Tailwind and the normal CSS. And that doesn't still mean that with Tailwind, you still can't build your own reusable components, right? You can. But it's just that with Sass, it just makes it like more easier and much more flexible since you are working with CSS direct. So you can be able to tweak in the styles how you want it. So that's just a perfect use case of like when to use Sass together with. Yeah, Chukobed, let's hear you.
Okay, my question is in JavaScript framework like a JavaScript component based framework like React or Vue,
Yeah.
is Sass still necessary? Kind of that.
Great question. So if you ask me, I have been writing React for years now, and then I'll tell you, you don't need it at the end of the day. So when working with those frameworks, I don't think, but you can also inject it to make it better, right? And people still work with them. But I, for one, I use Tailwind for like much of the bunch of stuff I do, right?
Okay, I get you. I get you.
So you guys are already checking React, Vue, Angular. Makes sense. So let's start picking the different frameworks that we are going to jump into. Next.js. They are mostly the same thing at the end of the day, right? All of them are trying to do the same thing. Just your own preference. And then you check like the use case for anyone. Because some of them might support like robust application. Talking about the likes of Next.js. Some of them can support any type of apps, depending on how you know how to write them. Talking about the likes of the almighty React, which we all love. And next guys are fighting React currently, right? But next is React at the end of the day. All right, so let's hear from the ladies. I've been hearing from the guys. and I haven't calmed down yet. So goodness, what have you learned so far? I shouldn't have to be doing the talking again. It will keep. I'm trying to gather a little bit of energy so it doesn't drain me out. Yeah, that's correct. To go bed. You can say they are for bigger projects, but you can build your small projects and just test them out. But the truth is, in the long run, you just find yourself building bigger projects, right? Always. It's big things you are building. So you learn it now, so that when you meet bigger projects, you are able to attack them. So Tybats, where is? Okay, she's not on the call. So I think like plenty people are experiencing the blackouts, right? Then that's a problem, and that's I'm 100% sure that that's what's causing like the low turnout of people in the class, right? So our hearts are with them, and then we hope that the light is being restored at soonest. That's for Nigerians on the call, right? But let's proceed. So do well to like help your other guys so that they can be able to keep up, and then everyone can keep doing their stuffs, right? And then try always deploying your stuffs. You can always just deploy and then send them to me on Twitter, right? I'll be happy to just view, or you can just post it and then we just view. I would really appreciate that. So I see how you guys are doing. So great. So let's proceed since nobody wants to say anything. So we also have exponential functions. So it returns the like math.log that returns the logarithm. Wow, this is serious. Logarithm. Yeah. It returns the logarithm of numbers with respect to base. To be honest, I'm exhausted. And I can't even measure logarithm. All right. So if base is null, the natural log is calculated, right? So number and base must be unitless. And then I can do math.log, and then what's the log of 10? And then it tells me it's 2.30 or 2 to base. Or I can give it a base and say what's the log of 10 to base 10, and then it returns a 1. Like that, right? And that's how it keeps going. So mass.pow, so it raises the power to the number of exponents, right? So if I do math.pow and then I gave it a base, maybe let's say 2, and then a particular exponent, let's say 2. So what's going to run deep within it, inside the function, is that it's going to do like 2 power 2, or 2 raised to the power of 2, which is basically 4, right? And that's how it works. So can you see all the different functions we have been accessing? Poll, all the different functions, they are all performing a particular task. None of them is doing 2 tasks or 3 tasks. No. You can't get a particular function and say add, and then the function will do multiplication, do division, do addition. No. Each function has a particular set of tasks that it's trying to achieve and it's going to give you at the end of the day. Are we together? So let's go. All right, so we can also have the square root of a number, which is used with math.square, which is SQRT, and then you pass a number to it. So we can get the square root of 10, we can get the square root of 100, which is 10. We can also call like the division method. Well, that is, we are dividing 1 by 3. So what we are doing here is that we are saying math.div, which is 1 divided by 3, we get a value, and then we are finding the square root of that value. And then at the end of the day, it's giving us 0.577, blah, blah, blah. We can also have the square root of -1, which is giving us a non, simply means not a number. And then in programming like JavaScript, not a number is also a number, right? So you understand that concept later on. So it gives us a non, which is not a number. And then we are good to go. So trigonometric functions, we can also call other trigonometric functions on it, like math.cos, that is calling like the cosine on a particular number. And you can see it gives us the value. You can call the sine, the tan, acos, asine, atan, etc, right? Unit functions to check the compatibility, to be comparable, etc. Bunch of other things and other functions that you can access. You can check the percentage, you can do a random stuff, you can do a division, and a lot of other things, right? So with this, we'll just leave the math.math, and then we go to the meta to get more. So to import this, it works with this guy, Sass, and then you call meta, and then it works with mixin. So meta.apply. So in a particular mixin, you can be able to apply a mixin to a meta, like maybe let's say meta.apply mixin, and then you pass the argument of that particular mixin. If the mixins argument are optional, you just leave it blank, and then it uses the normal default values, right? Just like how we explained initially. So it includes the mixin with the arguments. If this is passed a content block, it forwards to mixin. So the mixin must be a mixin value such as 1 returned by meta.getMixin, right? So that's how this works. For the meta, you can use meta to load CSS, and then what this does is that it loads the module at the URL. So the module at a particular CSS, you can be able to load it using the meta.load CSS. You just pass the URL to where the CSS exists, and then so it includes the CSS as though it's written as the component of the mixin. The width parameter provides configuration for the modules. If it's passed, it must be a map from variable names without the $sign to the value of those variables, right? So those are just the concepts around this. You can read more about functions, how to calculate arguments, how to accept content, right? How to calculate a name from the meta methods, how to call a particular function using the meta.call to call a function, and then you pass the argument of that function. If the argument doesn't have function values too, you can also leave it blank, and then it works with the default variables. And a lot of stuffs, right? You can call the content.exist to see, it returns a boolean to see if a particular content exists. You can return a future exists to see if a particular future exists. So this returns whether the current SaaS implementation supports feature. So the feature must be a string. That's the currently recognized feature R. So these are the currently recognized features, which is global variable shadowing, which means that a local variable will shadow global variables, right? We've explained about shadowing before. We also talked about, so this is about extend selector pseudo class. So this is how you can work that, which means that the extend rule will affect selectors nested in the pseudo class, right? Like this. Different stuff. So the function is deprecated and should be avoided. See the breaking changes here. So this function is particularly deprecated. So you have to be reading to know all the functions deprecated and the ones that exist, so that when you are working, you know, like the right stuff to work with, right? Nice. So I guess we are good to go. And now we are going to head over Sorry, guys. All right. So let's head over to the next stop. And then this is the Sass selector module. What does it do? So let's check it out. So the function in this module inspects and manipulates selectors. So that's what the function in this particular module does. Whenever they return a selector, it's always a comma separated list. So the selector list that separates this. Sorry, Divine sent me some content initially. Okay, so we're on the right tracks, right? So we are currently treating selectors, we have done nesting, so we have to rush fast and then talk about different data types, numbers, strings, and colors, right? Yeah, so and with that, we are done for today's session. So we are on the right track. So these are the selector modules, and these are the different methods that this module gives us access to. And then we can be able to see these are for selectors. So selector argument to these functions may be in the same format. No. So this returns whether the selector super matches all the elements that the selector sub matches. Just some few concepts. Yeah, so let's leave the selector, guys, since we have like some other things to achieve today, right? We only have like barely 40 minutes to the end of the class, and we are going to be taking questions and some other overview. So the last guy here is string, and let's assess some methods that have to do with string. So string.quote, which is the first one. What does this does? It returns the string as a quoted string, right? So if I pass Helvetica into string.quote, it's going to quote and then return this guy for me. But then since Helvetica is already quoted here, it returns Helvetica still quoted. But in this guy, it wasn't quoted. So I can say string.index and I can get a string and substring, and then it returns the number of substring in the string or null if the string doesn't contain a substring. So string can have substrings, right? And then it can tell us the number of substrings that are inside of it. Like take for example, we have Helvetica Nueve, Nue. And then in the substring is Helvetica, right? And then it returns how many times Helvetica is a substring inside of this whole string. And then it tells us only one time. Yeah, nah, this serious, bro. Because this is returning like something different. So strings are a bit tricky. So you also have the insert. Who's that, please?
Okay, sir, I just want to talk about this string. Why is returning 11 is that it counts. Are you getting me, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, on the strings, why? Go back to the documentation, please. Now it's returning 11 because if you count from Helvetica N, being the index, will stand on position 11. That's why it's giving you 11. And then H, yeah.
Your mic is off. Okay. So like I was saying, I haven't worked with like most of these stuffs. Like I said, I have been working with Tailwind for most of my building, and then these other guys, and then Sass a few number of times. But so you can also get the length of a string. Yeah, to know like what's the length of it. Like here where we have this guy, and then it says the length is 14. We pass bold, it says the length is 4. We pass an empty string, and then it tells us that the length is 0, right? So in strings in JavaScript, they can also be sliced. So slice means you cutting a particular string, and then to achieve this, you pass the string. Maybe you have a string called phytech, and then you put a start and an end. So you are saying, I want you to start or slice the string starting from here and then ending here. So take, for example, let's say phytech has 9 letters or 9 words. I can say, hey, start slicing from 1 and end at 3. And then to start from 1, 2, 3, and it's just give us fit, which is FIT, right? That's how it works. So let's head over and take a look, right? So you can say sling dot slice, and then this is the string we pass, and then we tell it slice from 11. So if we say slice 11, we put a starting without an ending. It's going to put the starting, it's going to put the starting from the starting point to the whole end of the string. So that's why here it's starting from 11, which is n, and then it's getting the rest, which is new. And then next we can say, hey, start from 1 and end at 3. That's why it's giving us hell, HEL, right? 1, 2, 3. We say start at 1, end at -6, taking this backward, right? And then it's giving us hell vertical. So string does split. So it returns a bracketed, comma separated list of substrings of string that are separated by the dollar separator. So the separators aren't included in these substrings. If limit is a number 1 or higher, this splits on at most that many separators, and so returns at most limit plus strings. The last substring contains the rest of the string, including any remaining does. So that's how you split. You pass in a string. Come in. So we pass a string, and then we tell it, hey, separate this into other strings using, maybe we pass the type of separator we want, and then we tell it separate it using this guy. Can you see? So it goes, okay, it says anywhere that there's a space, it knows that it's a new string. So that's why this guy is a string on its own, this UI is a string on its own, this emoji, simply because they are separated by a space. And then it forms this and returns it in a list, right? And then we can do this here, giving it a limit, and then a limit of 1, and then it's just going to split it once. And then once it finds a space, it splits, and then the remaining, it turns it to one particular value. Good. So just like in JavaScript also, where you have the uppercase, you can use string dot uppercase to be able to change the whole value of a string to uppercase values, right? So you can see these are just how modules work. And we have understood this concept and went deep down to explain this one after another, right? And then with this, nobody is supposed to experience any trouble understanding how they work. So you can also use dot to lowercase. You can get the unique ID, which returns a randomly generated unquoted string that's guaranteed to be a valid CSS identifier and to be unique within the current CSS compilation. So unique ID, that's what it does. It returns any valid different type of strings or different type of alphabets together to be a particular strings. It just generates them randomly, right? So you can unquote. So it returns as an unquoted string. This can produce strings that aren't valid CSS, so use with caution. So be careful when using the dot unquotes, right? And then make sure you read the documentation properly. So with this, we have assessed like all the different modules that are associated with Sass, and then see the different functions that exist inside of these modules. And then we know how to manipulate these guys with the function. So next, we are going to check out data types. But before data types, I would like to take in questions and then hear your concerns, and we'll be good to go. So let me get you guys now. Yo, guys, Shuku Obed. Yeah, proceed.
So my question is, all these SAS functions and modules, can you use it with the LifeSAS compiler? In like the LifeSAS compiler extension in VS Code, or do you need to install SAS in your and before you can use it?
Yeah, good question. So it's two different ways. So you can do the style installation. There are some certain tools you can use using npm, right? But for now, we do not have npm. But then to make this work, we can be able to make use of a particular VS Code extension that we can use to work with SAS. So let me just try to search for this extension and see if I can.
LifeSAS compiler. LifeSAS
Yeah,
compiler.
that's SAS compiler. Yeah, so okay, yeah, it should be this guy. Yeah, so lifestyles compiler. Can see the total installation it has, and then I can just click on install. So with this guy, he can be able to help me compile my SAS code into normal CSS, and then my HTML file can understand this styling and then take all necessary effects. Beside this, I can make use of Node.js, and I install all necessary dependencies I want to work with, and then these dependencies can then further be used to compile my files and then make it easy to work. So for now, I have just installed this and I can keep working. Yeah, so let's hear it, boss.
Okay, so my main problem here is this is a LifeSAS compiler with all these module stuff and this that you need to be fetching from the main SAS this thing. And this LifeSAS compiler, can I work with it? Like, can it compile it to CSS, or I need a native SAS compiler?
No, it will compile this to CSS for you. It should.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so any other person? Questions before I proceed? Yeah, so no questions for me, meaning I can proceed. So emojis, if you want me to proceed, if you want me to stop here for today and I've bombarded you, you can also tell me. So I stop. And then I haven't noticed Fatima in the class. Fatima, what's up? How's it going so far? Nice. Noah, what's up? Godfrey, my guy. All right, so let's proceed. So next up, let's check out like the different variables that exist in Sass. So first, let's have an overview. Okay, so let's go. So Sass supports a number of value types. Sass supports a number of value types, most of which come straight from CSS. Every expression produces a value. Variables hold values. Most value types come straight from CSS. So numbers which may or may not have units like 12 or 100px. So strings which may or may not have quoted like Helvetica New or bold. Yeah. So these are just the example of the different values you can use, which are regarded as data types or value types. We have numbers, we have strings, we have colors. So colors which are referred by as hex representation or by name, which is this, or this. We have list of value, which may be separated by spaces or commas and may be enclosed in square brackets or no brackets at all. You can have a look. So a few more are specific to Sass. So the Boolean value types, we have true and false. This is like basically the same thing with programming, right? Like I told you, Sass is just introducing programming concept into the normal CSS, right? So we have the singleton value like null. Then we have the maps that associate values with keys like background red, foreground pink. This for the maps, right? Function references to call a function, to get a function. All these are regarded as values. So let's start with numbers. So numbers in Sass have two components, the number itself and its units. So for example, in 16px, the number is 16 and the unit is the px. So numbers can have no units and they have complex units. See units below for more detailed examples. So there are different type of units, just like in CSS, right? Where we have px, we have rem, and we have say cm and what have you, right? just to specify the particular units that you are specifying that number for. So take for example, in this case, we are saying it's 16 px, meaning the unit is of px, of pixels, and then it's 16 of those pixels. And then I can choose to write a number without units, and it still works as normal numbers, right? So that's how they work. You can perform mathematical operations. This is like saying 5 times 2 px. This is like saying 10 px here. Good. So SAS numbers supports the same format as CSS numbers, including a specific notation, which is written with an E between the number and its power of 10. Because support for scientific notation in browsers has historically been spotty, SAS always compiles it to fully expanded numbers, right? So you can work with this, like saying 5.2 exponential 3, which adds 3 zeros to 0.2, which is going to make it 200, and then it appends this to make it 5002. Then you can use the minus to get like 0.06. So this is how you can work with them in numbers, right? So heads up, SAS doesn't distinguish between whole numbers and decimals. So for example, math.dev 5 and 2 returns 2.5, which is 2.5, right? So rather than 2. This is same behavior as JavaScript, but different from many other programming languages. So now let's check out units. So SAS has powerful support for manipulating units based on how real units are calculated. Calculations work. When two numbers are multiplied, their units are multiplied as well. When one number is divided by another, the result takes its numerator units from the first number and its denominator from the second number. A number can have any number of units in the numerator and or the denominator. So take for example, we can divide 2 px with 2 seconds. That's like saying 2 pixels per second, right? Or 5 pixels per 2 seconds. We can divide 30 degrees by 2 seconds and then divide it by 2 em, right? So depending on this, it knows how to handle them and to run the stuffs, right? So that's SAS for you. Yeah, question. Or is someone making a mistake? Can I proceed?
You can proceed, sir.
All right, guys, let's go. So SAS will automatically convert between compactable units, although units it will choose from the result depending on which implementation of SAS you are using, or you try to combine incompatible, like 1 inches plus 1 em, SAS will throw an error, right? So they are just saying you can't combine inches to em. So they are incompatible. So you have to know like the different ones that are compatible with one another for you to know how you'll be working or which of these to be working with, right? So let's keep going. So heads up, percentages in SAS works just like every other unit. They are not interchangeably with decimals because in CSS, decimals and percentages mean different things. So for example, 50% in number, which with its percent into units, and SAS considers is different than the number 0.5. So you can convert between decimals and percentages using unit arithmetic, Man.dev, etc. Right? You can keep doing all those conversions. So precision. So SAS numbers are represented internally as 64-bit floating point values. They support up to 10 digits of position after the decimal point when serialized to CSS for purposes of equality. So only the 10 digits of a number after the decimal points will be included in the generated CSS. And then operations like double equals to and greater than or equals to will consider number rules equivalent, right? So that's just the concept for numbers and then strings. So let's check out strings now. So strings are sequence of characters. Now this is a better explanation to strings. Specifically Unicode points. SAS supports two kinds of strings whose internal structure is the same, but which are rendered differently, right? Quoted like Helvetica new, word is back, and unquoted strings, right? Like bold is not quoted. So together, this cover the different kinds of text that appear in CSS. So fun fact, you can convert a quoted string to an unquoted string using the string.uncode function. So if you have a string that is quoted, you can unquote it. And you can convert an unquoted string to a quoted string using the string.quote function, right? That's how they work. So escapes. All SAS support the standard CSS escape codes. Any character other than a letter from A to F or a number from 0 to 9, even a new line, can be included as part of a string by writing in front of it, the backward slash. So any character can be included as part of a string by writing backward slash followed by its Unicode. And then you can optionally include a space after the code points number to indicate whether the Unicode number extends this. So you can use this guy to escape a particular Unicode within the quotes. Like take for example now, I can't have a double quote inside of another double quote. It's going to conflict. Or have a single quote inside of the, or you at some point you can have a single quote inside of a double quote, right? Some programming languages allow that. But to be on the safer side, you have to make use of escapes, which an example of an escape is the backward slash that is being used here. And then if I want to make use of a double quote inside of another quote, I can just use a backward slash and then put the double quotes. And then you see, I can be able to access my quotes here, right? Like a quick example, I can write this in, where's my code? All right, cool. So I'm not allowed to write this. Let's say dollar name. I'm trying to declare a variable now. And then it's inside the quotes, and then I write Manoa. So I can't be able to write this. This won't work. So the only way for me this to work is for me to escape them. And how do I escape? The backward slash. Saying that, hey, this is, put the backward slash in this also. And then I can be able to read the data that's before this guy. And then I'm good to go. Right? So we all understand how this concept works within the next class. And then we are going to be using CSS, SCSS hands-on. Those of you at home, try and use it hands-on too before the next class, so that we are all going to be in sync while we are learning and teaching, right? So those are the ways to escape the values. So fun fact, for characters are allowed to appear in strings using the Unicode escape produces exactly the same string as writing the character itself. So like take for example, these two ladies, which are emojis, to represent it in characters, you just input this, and then you have to put the backward slash to tell it that, oh, this is not just a text, this is a Unicode character, and then your SCSS is able to read this as an emoji and is able to display it for the user, right? So that's how that works. So quoted strings are written between either single or double quotes, as in a Helvetica. They can contain interpolation as well as any unescaped character, except for the forward slash, which can be escaped as the double forward slash, or whenever was used to define that strings, which can be escaped, or the forward slash with this guy, or the forward slash before the double quotes. That's how we do it. Or if you want to create a new line, you just put the forward slash and then an A in front of it, and then it creates a new line for you. New lines which can be escaped as this, so include a trailing space. Nice. All right, so let's proceed. So quoted. Okay, I was explaining this. So quoted strings are guaranteed to be compiled to SCSS that have the same content, or these guys. So let's just move fast. So these are the unquoted guys. So unquoted strings are written as CSS identifiers, and then that's how they work. So we don't have much time now, so I will just rush this so we can be able to check like the other variables. You see string indices that we talked about. So we can check colors, and then with that we might call it a day, right? So you can check like other methods like the Boolean to understand how they work. So Sass has built-in support for color values, just like CSS color. Each color represents a point in a particular color space, such as RGB or lab. Sass colors can be written as hex codes, which is this, SCSS color names, midnight blue, transparent, or the color functions like this, RGB, lab, or color. That's how they work. So color spaces, Sass supports the same set of color spaces as CSS. A Sass color will always be emitted to the same color space it was written in. It's in the legacy color space, or you can convert it to another space using color.toSpace. All other color functions in Sass will always return a color in the same space to the original color, even if the function made changes to the color in another space. So although each color space has bounds on the gamut, it expects for its channels, Sass can represent out of gamut values for any color space. This allows a color from a wide gamut space to be safely converted into and back out of a narrow gamut space without losing information, right? So heads up. So CSS requires that some color function clip their input channels. For example, this RGB can be clipped, its red channel to be within 0 and 255. And so it's equivalent to 25500, even though 500 RGB is distinct value that Sass can represent. You always use Sass color to change. Nice. So we can cap, maybe let's say our RGB colors, the max is 255, right? But then here they were able to use 500 simply because within the channels, you can be able to cap this and say 0 to 255. So even though it accepts anything higher than 255, it regards it at 255, right? And then that's how that works. So let's check out lists, and then I've explained what lists are. So list is just a sequence of other values. It can be a list of strings, it can be a list of numbers, etc., right? So elements in lists can be separated by commas. like Helvetica, Aria, sans serif, and then it can be separated by spaces by we saying 10px, 5px, 0, 0, or by slashes, as long as it's consistent within the list. So as long as you make it consistent, and if a particular list is using slash, you should keep working with slash. If a particular list is using comma, you should keep working with comma, and then it's going to keep regarding it that way, right? And then that's just how lists work. So you can see slash separated lists. These are examples. And then using lists, these are how you can get their indices. You can read through how you can access elements. We have explained all these parts where we saw how to get the end parts, etc. Right? So we haven't gone to this true or false guy, which is the Boolean, right? I told you guys to check it yourself, but Booleans are logical values which are either true or false. So in addition, their literal forms, Booleans, are returned by equality and relational operations, as well as many built-in functions like math.comparable and math.hashKey, right? So you can work with Boolean functions, but just know that they are either true or false. And then don't write them in double quotes or single quotes. If not, your code is going to refer to them as a string. Just write them openly like that, and then it's able to understand. Okay, so I think someone was raising their hand, Chuku Obed. So we'll take your question and then any other one, but we'll be stopping the class by 12 on the dot, and then we are good to go.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I.
Okay, so all these SAS functions and values, I think they can be only used to write logical styling, not like styling HTML document, like giving functions or writing logic on like for example, writing something like calculator or calculating two numbers to print out value. Like they can only be used to write dynamic styling. I think so.
Yeah. That's what I was explaining since from like the onset. I was trying to say that SAS brings a combination between your normal styling and then programming logics to be able to append all those stylings to your files or to the HTML documents. That's how SAS works. So you write it logically, and then depending on the particular logic that is running in the file or the particular variable or value that it gets, is what is going to append to be the particular style at that time, or how the components are going to look like. So that's just how SAS works. It
Yeah.
makes you write logical styling. You are being correct with that.
But my confusion now is like, for example, when you are making reference of JavaScript argument, you made mention of something like adding two numbers and like 1 + 1, and it will print 2, and that
Yeah.
way it prints. You can decide to impute it as a text content on a particular HTML element.
Yeah.
So my question is, can you do something like that in SAS or
No.
just only dynamic styling?
Yeah, SAS only work with styling. So I'm just using the concept of JavaScript to explain this because it's the same concept that they are appending here.
Yes.
And then you guys are going to be
similar.
subsequently. So if you learn the two concepts together, to understand JavaScript is not going to be like rocket science for you, right? But just know that I was trying to explain how functions work in JavaScript and then how we can be able to make use of them within SAS. But just know that SAS is working strictly with styles, but JavaScript is working with any technique that you supply to it. So great,
I understand now.
Great observations, Uded. I like that. Yeah, so I'll just take one more. If there's none, we call it a day. Wait, everyone is good to go? Are you guys telling me you are all satisfied?
We'll go and read more documentations to be more familiar with it. That's why we are quiet. So.
And then you try out more stuff.
Yes, I just think we need to go and read in depth about it, and to even go back to after this recording session is being posted, go back to it and check it very well before we can still proceed on any other thing.
Yeah, so I will suggest you just keep reading about it. Just keep trying different stuffs, keep reading, and then trying. That's very important. Try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, and then you learn all like the different stuffs while you are trying, right? But for now, it's a good start, and then we are set to go. So thank you everybody for your time. So we had a low turnout today because of the light issue in the country. But we hope to have more people in the class next time, and then do well to share the resources with them so they can always join in, and then they can catch up to be together with us, right? But in the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and then have a wonderful day. Yeah, so I'll just stop the recording and then I'm out of here.